week's episode of Pokémon Sun and Moon, Ash befriends a local stray Litten, the signature fire starter from Pokémon Sun and Moon. Does Ash capture this elusive fire Pokémon? The answer is a resounding hell freaking no. Honestly, this week's episode of Pokémon Sun and Moon kind of annoyed me for a number of different reasons. One, the artwork. It was just bad this episode, and I'm not just talking about the overall art style of the show. I'm actually used to that at this point. I just think that there were a lot of moments which look kind of sloppy in this episode. Not just from Ash, but mostly from the Pokémon. There were a lot of weird situations in this week's episode where Pikachu's face just didn't look right. There were also a lot of disproportionate moments, mostly from the introduction of the Alolan form of Persian in this episode, but we'll get to that one in a second. The other reason that this episode kind of annoyed me is that it's basically following the same exact story beats of the Rowlet episode, where it's all about this rare starter Pokemon who's orphaned and living with a group of other wild Pokemon. Before it was Rowlet hanging out with some Toucannon, some Trumbeak, and Pick-a-Pex. In this week's episode, it's all about a Litten who is living with a Stoutland. That's right, it's living with a dog. A cat and a dog. Cats and dogs living together. Mass hysteria! Despite the fact that I'm currently bitching about the episode, this is still a pleasant episode of Pokémon Sun and Moon, and I have to constantly remind myself that the Pokémon anime series is essentially catered to younger audiences. It's made to promote all of the brand new Pokémon video games, and on that front, it's actually doing a pretty good job, and overall, this was still a pretty pleasant episode of Pokémon Sun and Moon, and if you're a fan of Litten, I highly recommend checking it out. So, what's the story this week? Well, Ash is still continuing his journey in the Alola region, which is to say he's not really going on a journey, he's basically just going to school. I thought it was really cool, though, that we actually got to see other students go into the Pokemon school, aside from the core group, because I just always thought that was funny that, like, that's the only students that go to this place. We don't really get to see them do anything, but it at least shows us that there are going to be other students, and we're probably going to see a lot of anime-only characters, and frankly, I'm ready to see that material. But first, we still have some development to go through, and that brings us to Litten, a character that we've actually seen for the last couple of episodes. There's been this stray Litten who's always been running around and stealing food, and we get to learn that a lot of the fruit vendors and people who work in the marketplace in town have actually been feeding this Litten because it's freaking adorable. Now, Litten is really awesome because not only is it living on its own, but it's also kind of taking care of this very old Stoutland, which is a dog Pokemon. Like I said, there's something really funny about a cat and dog living together, and I think the dynamic itself is honestly just kind of sweet. Sickeningly so, even. I swear this episode has got so many cute scenes it'll give you diabetes. But still, I really like it, because Stoutland is not only protecting Litten, but it's also teaching him how to perfect his fire-type techniques, and he needs to learn these moves fast, because it seems like Litten is constantly being attacked by this super pissed-off Alolan Persian. Alolan Persian just looks ridiculous. I can't get around it. In this week's episode, his big, round, ridiculous face just puts a big smile on mine the entire time. And the fact that it's not even like a stray Persian, it actually belongs to a Pokemon trainer, or at least this old lady, and she just allows it to go around town and bully all these small little Pokemon. There's something really funny about that to me. I don't know what it is. But essentially, throughout this entire episode, the Alolan Persian is constantly attacking Litten and injuring it to the point of basically fainting. So Ash decides to save the Litten, bring it to the Pokemon Center, and nurse it back to health. The thing is, though, the Litten doesn't really want anything to do with Ash. In fact, they make it a point that Litten are not, like, very affectionate Pokemon. They don't really care about their trainers all that much. They're just sort of indifferent to just about anything. Just like most real-life cats, which is something that I think is really funny. But Litten decides to go back to Stoutland and Ash decides to follow, where it culminates in this big epic battle with Persian, where essentially both Litten and Pikachu just completely wail on this Alolan Persian with their signature techniques, and they don't even have to try to hurt this thing. This thing also attacks Ash like a number of times, but it doesn't really cause much damage, despite the fact that Persian is basically like a big freaking puma, or basically like a mountain lion. You'd think it'd be a lot more devastating, but, you know, I think that would be a little too hardcore for the Pokemon anime series, to have a scene where, like, a Persian just decided to attack Ash's jugular. I think that would be a little messed up. He does get scratched a couple of times, but you're not really going to see any blood dripping anywhere. We have to remember, this is the Pokemon anime series. We have to cater to a younger audience. That's just the way that they do things. But the thing is, I thought that this episode was going to go in a direction where Ash was actually going to catch Litten, and that doesn't happen at all. In fact, at the end of the episode, it seems like Litten and Stoutland have completely disappeared. In fact, they've actually just decided to move to a brand new location, and Litten is still going around town, getting free food, and completely pissing off Ash. I just wish that Ash would have caught this Pokemon. You know, it's not realistic for Ash to actually do something like that because it's not in his character. Ash is a very caring trainer. Not only does he see his Pokemon companions as essentially family, but he'll go out of his way to help out any downtrodden Pokemon that's actually living in the wild, and that's exactly what happened in this episode. It's a very good, strong quality of Ash, which I honestly think is good for younger viewers. It shows them to be caring and accepting of a lot of different people, and to always just not just think about yourself. Ash could have just caught this Pokemon and thought about, ooh, I can fill out my Pokedex and have a cool fire type, but instead, he just decided to help out Litten, and that's something that he's done a number of times in the series. But you all know that if this, Pokemon were real and you were in Ash's situation when it was attacked by the Alolan Persian, you'd totally throw a Pokeball at that Litten, especially considering how freaking rare it is. It's a starter-type Pokemon, and those things do not appear in the wild, unless, of course, it's the Pokemon anime series. So what's the rundown on this week's episode of Pokemon Sun and Moon? Like I said, this episode is strikingly similar to the Rowlet episode, the only big differences being that Team Rocket is not here, they're on vacation, and just plain chilling, which I think is really funny, especially the fact that Meowth actually wears human clothes, sunglasses, and a visor. Just don't think about it too much. But really, this episode is dedicated all to Litten, so Litten fans are definitely going to enjoy that. It certainly displays a lot of personality. In fact, I think that's definitely the best thing about a lot of the new Pokemon from Sun and Moon, is the fact that they just seem so real. Rowlet just had this, goofy, laid-back, fun personality, with Litten being the exact opposite in many ways. Kind of a loner wolf, only really caring about itself, but sort of secretly caring for other Pokemon such as Stoutland. I really liked the fact that you had those two Pokemon living together. There's something unique about that. Not to mention, it's not too often that we get to see, older Pokemon, seeing what happened when they get a little older. This was clearly a Stoutland, which was, up there in the years, which I think was kind of interesting. But overall, it was just kind of a standard episode with Ash getting to know this Litten. Honestly, the moment when he decided to bring it back to Professor Kuki's house, and he was actually trying to take care of it when it had the cone around its neck and everything, that was a really heartwarming scene, I'm not gonna lie. It was actually quite pleasant, and most of this episode was. But to me, it was just sort of brought down by some of the bad animation and some of the artwork. But to be fair, most kids are not even going to notice that stuff. In fact, younger viewers are probably going to love this episode, especially because it involves Litten, who is arguably one of the most popular Pokemon from Sun and Moon. Not to mention, there's a lot of great humor in this episode, and the series is doing something right, which is a lot of really great funny expressions, especially from Ash himself. Even though, he seems kind of young and inexperienced in this series, but that's just the way these Pokemon anime series are. They kind of almost reboot or reset themselves, whenever they start, a brand new show. But still, I actually did like this one a lot. I think Litten is a really fun Pokemon. I especially loved all of the visual cues in this episode when it was training with Stoutland, when it was using its signature fire-type techniques. You could actually see, the little spikes of fire which were coming up on its back. Kind of like a cat's hair, raising up on its back. It's exactly what it does in the game, and it translated really well to this one right here. So this was a fun and charming episode of Pokemon Sun and Moon, but it's not exactly reinventing the wheel or anything. But it's totally watchable, especially for Pokemon fans, and if you're still riding the high of Pokemon Sun and Moon, I highly recommend checking out this anime series. It's okay so far. I do believe that X, Y, and Z had better action scenes, but I'm not going to judge it entirely just yet, because next week's episode looks like it's going to be a lot of fun. In fact, the animation quality seems to be going up a little bit more in next week's episode, and we're finally going to have an episode which is going to be devoted to Lily, who is arguably the most important character from Pokemon Sun and Moon, a side character, if you will. So I can't wait to see what they're going to do with her in this series. For me, honestly, the most cool thing about this week's episode was just getting to see that there's going to be a brand new Pokemon movie, which is going to be kind of like a reboot of the entire series. So I'm really excited to see what they're going to do with that. They have a small trailer which barely shows anything, just Ash with a brand new hat. But it seems to go back in time, like when he was in Pallet Town and getting ready to go on his journey, maybe getting Pikachu for the first time, and even on the poster that they actually revealed, it looks like Ho-Oh might even play a role. And for those who watched the original episode or remember it from back in the day, Ash actually saw Ho-Oh at the very end of that episode, which I remember back in the day just completely like made my mind explode, because it was just when I was just getting started into Pokemon, but when I saw Ho-Oh, I was just like, what the hell is that thing? That being said, this episode right here was okay, and that's exactly why I'm going to give this episode a 3 out of 5. A fun, average episode of Pokemon Sun and Moon. Thank you guys so much for watching this review. Before you guys leave, make sure to tell me what you thought about this week's episode in the comments section below. Are you a fan of the Fire-type Litten? What did you think about this week's episode, and what do you hope to see from the rest of Pokemon Sun and Moon? Thank you guys again for watching. Make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video if you did like it, and leave me a comment or two. I will see you next time, and as always, stay dandy, baby.